Buddhist science is a study on Buddhism based on facts and science.
The Dual Realizations of Mind by Venerable Rungruan Pa Partsaro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. As described by the law of cause and effect in nature, when applying this law of nature to a mind study, what happening in a mental phenomenon can be defined in two components, one is a cause and another one is an effect. A cause is a specific condition or process that drives a certain state of mind or mental effect to arise as an effect, and in the meanwhile a certain state of mind also induces another condition or process to cause another state to arise as a series of chain reactions of aggregates of feeling, perception, and volitional formations, respectively by a stream of consciousness. And this is the reason why a mind is composed of aggregates of feeling, perception, volitional formation, and consciousness. As a matter of fact, the definition of mind in terms of the aggregates of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness is indeed a reflection of the descriptions of the processes of consciousness, and the associated states of feeling, perception, volitional formations. The relationship between a process and a state of the arising phenomenon inside a mind is a scientific basis to verify on a particular phenomenon whether it is a cause or an effect in the mind processing. In quantum physics, when making observations into the complexity of nature into the inner world of subatomic level, we encounter strange phenomena of a new law of nature which is different from what the world we live in, such as the duality properties of light. That is, what happening in the nature of subparticle world is so fast that we cannot detect both the properties of process and state at the same time. Therefore, when we take observations to detect on the perspective of particle properties, then we get the result in the formations of particle property. However, when we take observation on energy properties of the same phenomenon, then we get the result in the formations of energy property. In the 19th century, Sir Isaac Newton discovered that light was an energy traveling in wave forms, and later Albert Einstein received a Nobel Prize in 1922 for the discovery that light was also a particle by the photoelectric experiment, and he concluded the duality properties of light, that light had both properties of particle and energy at the same time. However, we still do not understand that why the light has this duality properties until in 1965, when Richard Feynman received a Nobel Prize for the mechanism of a particle and energy transformation in QED, quantum electrodynamics theory, explaining that in subparticle world, both mass and energy, in fact, are the same thing. When a particle of mass vibrates, it releases energy to the surround environment, and then turning itself into energy, while the surrounding energy absorbed the released energy, and then tuning itself to be a mass. So, when we make the next observation, it not the same particle that we observe at the beginning. The properties of mass and energy are not stable and interchanging very fast at all times. When we observe a movement of a particle from one place to another place, in fact it is a movement of energy, and this is the reason why we never can trace where the next move of a particle is, called the uncertainty principle. So, all things are impermanent, and deteriorating. When performing scientific observations, we find a strange reality of the nature of having two properties at the same time is called the duality property of nature. Simply implies whatever it is, depends on from what aspect of an observation. When we observe a typical phenomenon that is happening very fast, we can observe that sometimes the phenomenon is a matter, and sometimes it is an energy, depending on what kinds of observation tool and setup that we use in the experiment. What we understand as a single phenomenon is a collective series of many phenomena, and because what happening is very fast, then we can observe as a snapshot of what happening. This is called the duality properties of nature from observation, which reflects fundamental phenomena of cause and effect in nature, that is, the energy causes an effect on the changing of state, and in the meantime a new state incurred in arising energy that renews changing in state. And this is the reason why we abstractly call the law of cause and effect as the law of nature. In Buddhism there are special terms to distinguish the difference between the process and the state to describe the success in the final stage of mind improvement by the words, a noble path for a process to success, and an associated noble result of a state of success. That is, there is a process as a path that results in an associated state of mind. It is astonishing that in neuroscience, scientists also discover that within the central nervous system, there are varieties of neuron networks functioning as a specific path that yields an associated neurotransmitter reflecting a specific state of mind. What the Buddhism discovered 2,600 years ago was not just a philosophy, but it was a real phenomenal experimentation on the mind. Theoretically, a mind processing can be explained as a stream of consciousness of thalamic oscillation acting as a life. A mind interfacing with the world starts with receiving informative stimuli from the world through the 6 sense bases, sensory neurons, and then processing all the signals at the central nervous system. In this process of streaming of consciousness, the mind will fetch receiving signals which can be either a stimulus signal from the world's so-called external object of consciousness, or an internal signal from volitional formation so-called internal object of consciousness. Then the mind will execute a mind processing within the central nervous system. In this regard, a stream of consciousness will cause a series of associated mental factors reflecting an individual behavior of mind. Typically, a mind processing will continue starting from the beginning of receiving stimulus from the world at sensory neurons, then there is a signal processing at the central nervous system, before finally the mind will decide to take action in responding to the world at motor neurons to complete a batch of mind processing one at a time. In Buddhist philosophy, having a consciousness is compared like a person sleeping under a mango tree. The person wakes up from sleeping, then eating a mango, and then falling asleep after eating. Later, the person wakes up again and repeatedly eating a mango and falling asleep again and again. In this case, the waking up and sleeping of a person can be compared like an arising and fading consciousness, and the eaten mango can be compared like an object of consciousness. And a routine of a person waking up, eating a mango, and falling to sleep is a stream of consciousness. It is very astonishing that what we are doing in daily life, each of them is just a composition of these tiny little things of mind processing. In Buddhism, a consciousness is a process that drives all kinds of states of mind, while a feeling, and a perception, and volitional formations are various types of states of mind. And a stream of consciousness is an engine that drives a series of dependently states of mind. The concept of process and state paves a way to understand on the nature of how a mind is processing and on how the mind interfaces and responds to the world. That is, a mind processing is passing a signal along the central nervous system like passing a ball within a group of people lining up in a queue. A consciousness is acting like a process of fetching an object of consciousness with an associated emotional expression within a nervous network. And every time a mind receives stimulus from the world, a new ball is thrown into a group of people, and when a ball is passed from one person to the next person, then each person will has a certain characteristic to respond to the ball of the object of consciousness with a specific emotional expression of the state of mind. And when making a careful insight observation, we can learn the origin of problem, and the way to resolve the arising problem within the mind correctly. In this analogy, a stream of consciousness is just like passing a ball within the group, and a series of associated states of mind is like how a particular mind processing will respond to the receiving stimulus from the world as an act of being. In Buddhism, the focus of this observation experiment is to study on how a life will be able to act rightly to the world. That is, by having a mindfulness at all times in order to monitor the conditions of the mind if it is wholesomeness or unwholesomeness. And once whenever detecting any arising unwholesome state of mind, then learning on how to abandon it rightly by wisdom, so that the mind will be automatically rerouted the mind processing into the right path at all times, and by always having the right mindfulness and the right meditation with the right effort, then the mind will constantly processing into the right path of the right view, and the right thought with the wholesome state of mind, and resulting in the right speech, the right action, and the right livelihood, at all times, so called the Noble Eightfold Path. It is a perfectionist system of a noble person. At the first sight, the tasks to abandon all the defilements may seem to be a never-ending job due to the varieties and complexities of all kinds of defilements within mind processing. In addition, although the specific defilements may be abandoned by the traditional technique of meditation power, but later it still is renewed and arising within the mind processing again. The Buddha introduced a new way to resolve this problem systematically by applying a threefold study strategy by firstly categorizing all the defilements into three groups depending on where it will arise within the mind processing, that is, the rough defilements at the very far end of mind processing, the middle defilements at the courses of mind processing, and the finest defilements at the early part of mind processing. This strategy will focus to resolve the problems group by having mindfulness with attention to an appropriate wholesome matter as suggested by the Buddha to cope with the specific defilement, starting at the rough defilements and then tracing the problem along the courses of thought into the initial thought, then performing an insight observation, and then applying the Four Noble Truths to gain insight wisdom, and later using this wisdom to resolve for all the finest defilements of taints and latent dispositions within the mind processing of dependent origination. The Buddha called this solution methodology the cessations of all kinds of defilements by wisdom.